Welcome back to the Josh Kane Presidential Fireside Chat, recorded live from the deck of the main event, overlooking the mighty Ogunquit River and the Atlantic Ocean, the crown jewel of the Kane Empire. So just a little quick housekeeping. Again, I never intended to keep this show going with the Gilded Age. When I finished reading the President books back in January, I finished Uncle Joe. I wanted to circle back, maybe hit a couple of the robber barons, a couple of books on the Reconstruction. We're talking 6-8 books max, and I was going to start something else. Here we are. I'm like 30 books in on the Gilded Age. I've still got like 10 or 15 more to go. So what started out as 6 books is going to turn into somewhere north of 40. But today, we're going to do the late, great Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore. You can't tell the story of America without a guy like Cornelius Vanderbilt. Never held any elected positions, never served in any type of military position, but his life spans a huge part of America. He was born in 1794, so during George Washington's presidency, and he lives all the way until January 1877 during the tail end of the Grant administration. So, and he actually didn't even live to see the disputed election of 1876. Possibly a future episode in the Gilded Age. We'll focus in on the only stolen election in U.S. history. So he starts working during Thomas Jefferson's presidency. He was only 9 years old, and he's working for his dad. He's born in Staten Island, and he's shipping goods, people from Staten Island to Manhattan. So he gets a pretty early start in shipping. He's actually for all you legal eagles out there, I'm not a lawyer, even though I occasionally play one on this show. So if you're a fan of the Supreme Court, famous landmark decision, Gibbons versus Ogden, Cornelius Vanderbilt's actually one of the pilots, captains of the boats that are part of that lawsuit. And that again, I don't know enough about the law, but essentially opens the door to modern corporations, which opened the door for him to becoming very, very wealthy. So he goes on to basically dominate the shipping in the Northeast. He's everywhere. And Cornelius Vanderbilt can be best described as a mostly illiterate, swashbuckling pirate. It's not clear how well he can read or write. Most of, obviously, the letters were written by his secretaries. Letters were read to him. Anything like more than a sentence, I'm not sure he could read. But he grows this huge shipping empire. And during the gold rush, he's right there shipping stuff out to California and the crossing in Central America. People were already talking about doing some sort of canal, either in Panama or Nicaragua. And this is actually kind of a crazy story, and it actually probably deserves its own future episode in a future season. But there's an American, William Walker, who somehow becomes the president of Nicaragua and then goes to war with Cornelius Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is like one of the most powerful people in the country. He's very... We talked about in season 1 of this show, if you're still around, all those nameless, faceless presidents that no one remembers or knows. It's because guys like Vanderbilt were basically running the show. So he's almost more powerful than the U.S. military at this point, and he actually goes to war with William Walker in Nicaragua. Again, I'm only giving you a very light detail on this. If you want to look up William Walker, he's on Wikipedia, I guess. But again, William Walker probably deserves his own pre-Civil War episode. But, again, Cornelius Vanderbilt is dominating the shipping lanes out west to California. And he just makes his fortune that way. During the Civil War, he's not a very charitable guy. I mean, he's like completely obsessed with, he's very greedy. And he's not a nice guy at all. Constantly physically fighting people at the docks, well into adulthood, still physically fighting, racing his boats, crashing into other people's boats. Even in his horse and buggy, he would be racing people in the streets of Manhattan. At one point, he crashes and he almost dies. He's an insane person. But during the Civil War, he actually donates one of his ships. And it's actually to hunt down the SS Alabama, this Confederate ship. And during that famous battle where the Monitor sinks the Alabama, hopefully I'm getting that correct, his boats are there. They're on the scene. His boat is there during that battle and helps corner the Alabama. So after the war, to try and reconcile with the South, you notice how Northerners were always reaching out to Southerners were like, nope, the South will rise again. He actually donates an equal amount to start a university. So that's where Vanderbilt University comes into play. Those are the only two donations the guy makes. He is like so greedy, trying to build his wealth. But then after the Civil War, he sort of sees the writing on the wall with shipping, and that the trains are going to become the next big thing. So he gets into the train business, and he goes on to dominate that just like he did with the shipping, and eventually controls basically the whole Northeast shipping train lines from basically Chicago over. He owned everything, and I guess we don't talk about it that much because of the Great Depression in the 1930s, but there was a huge depression in the 1873. The whole country almost goes bankrupt. Vanderbilt almost goes bankrupt. Everybody's in big trouble. We had overbuilt the rail lines all over, and he ends up coming out ahead. He had enough money on hand, puts a bunch of people out of business, and again, he owns everything at that point. He goes on to build the Grand Central Station in New York. That was like his big accomplishment. He was like obsessed with himself. He wanted like buildings named after him. At one point, he wanted to donate a statue of himself and George Washington. I mean, he had a big, huge ego. He loved talking about himself. So at the height of his wealth, at one point he's worth about $105 million in that day's money. But to put it into perspective, for every $9 in circulation, he had one. So he was like more powerful. He had more money on hand than the U.S. Treasury. Compare that to today, like a guy like Bill Gates, who's the richest person or whatever. Bill Gates has like one for every $200 in circulation. So I mean, Vanderbilt's wealth is like unbelievable, and he actually is such a workaholic. He works right up until his death. He dies in 1877, right again at the tail end of Grant's administration, and he had 13 kids. Not all of them lived to adulthood. His favorite actually dies during the Civil War, George Washington Vanderbilt. His next oldest son is William Henry Vanderbilt. So he's a very patriotic guy. He inherits 95% of the estate, and he was cruel to William Henry his whole life. I mean, just a real cruel guy. But then he leaves his entire fortune basically to William Henry. But he had been mentally beating him down like his whole life. Just not a good guy. So he dies. William Henry Vanderbilt inherits the entire fortune. But he was not. On the one hand, he actually doubles the money. So he doubles it from 105 to $200+ million. But he's like kind of a softie. He's not like hardcore like his dad. And he dies within 9 years of his dad dying. So he didn't live anywhere near as long as his dad. So his kids then inherit the vast amount of the wealth. But then the family blows through all the money. It is within 40 years of Cornelius's death, the wealth is completely gone. There isn't a millionaire left. I mean, they blew through it all. They were building huge 250-room mansions on Fifth Avenue. There are 4 or 5 of them right on Fifth Avenue. And by the end, every single one of them is knocked down. Not one of those mansions on Fifth Avenue survive. Obviously, there's some mansions in Newport, Rhode Island, So if you ever get a chance, I've only been to Newport, I think, once. We did the cliff walk. I did not go in the mansions. I regret it every day since I've read this book. We also went to the Biltmore Estate down in Asheville, and at the time the kids were little. It was like burning hot out, and I feel like the price was like going to Disney World, and I couldn't justify spending all that money to go see the house. And now I've got to live with that the rest of my life because I'm never going to Asheville again. So don't be like me. Learn from my mistakes. Go if you're in Asheville. The only reason to go would be to go to the Biltmore, and I totally blew it. You think about, so they did like a family reunion in the 1970s, and by then there wasn't even one millionaire left amongst the Vanderbilts. And the great irony is the most successful Vanderbilt since Cornelius is Anderson Cooper. CNN's Anderson Cooper is a Vanderbilt, and he probably works it seems like he's on everything. He was probably one of the best guest hosts for Jeopardy. I don't like who they picked. I didn't like that guy that they fired. I don't like that Mayim Bialik, and I don't like Ken Jennings. There were like 3 or 4 people that were way better than all of them. And Anderson Cooper was one of them. And I just saw that Anderson Cooper is putting out a book, which I think I'm going to read because it's so fascinating reading about them blowing through the money. It's like a soap opera. And people were obsessed. I know people say we're a celebrity-obsessed culture today. People were completely obsessed. Anytime there were parties in New York, the muckety-mucks of New York City were hosting parties. Thousands of people would line the streets of the Vanderbilts, hosting these parties. So we've always been a celebrity-obsessed culture, and it was always in the newspapers. But I've got 2 great book recommendations. This one, The Tycoon, the first Tycoon. This was excellent. Again, you can't write the history of the country without Cornelius Vanderbilt. Just a great book. I highly recommend this. Again, tons of U.S. history. Again, the whole purpose of this show is you'll find that yesterday's fake news and conspiracy theories are today's fake news and conspiracy theories. Nothing's changed. This other one, this is more of a, it's a little bit soap opera-y. Fortune's Children. It's actually written by Arthur Vanderbilt II, so he's part of the family, and he just kind of shows you how the family blew through all that money. So, more of a, I don't want to say fun read, but it was pretty fun. It's depressing, though. I have such respect for money, and to see them just blow through that fortune like that is really it's too much. And it's a great reminder when you think about those nameless, faceless presidents of the Gilded Age. All of them supported a very heavy estate tax. It's hard to blame them. These people are terrible. But great book. You got to read the Vanderbilt. Again, you're going to learn a ton about the country. Obviously, I'm not going over every single detail. Today's travel recommendation, I'm going to go with the Grand Canyon today. It was the first national park that I ever intentionally went to. It was the 3rd national park I'd ever been to, but I didn't know what a national park was until we went to the Grand Canyon in 2009. And I made every mistake in the book, and I regret it to this day. We drove from Vegas. We did a day trip to the South Rim. It's a super long day. It was like 4 hours each way. We were in the park for maybe an hour or 2, and then we turned right around and went back to Vegas. Huge mistake, and I've tried to learn from it since. So, you try to learn something new every day. Sometimes it's learning what not to do. Don't go to the Grand Canyon in a day trip. Try and stay the night inside the park, like I mentioned before. The Grand Canyon is terrific, but I gotta go back. I would like to stay. There's a hotel right on the rim that looks terrific. Maybe I'll get there someday, but maybe not. I really blew it. So that's Cornelius Vanderbilt. This is the Josh Kane Presidential Fireside Chat. Clearly, I couldn't do 2 people at once, so I'm going to save Rockefeller for next, which may end up being the most important show in the history of the show, which says a lot because I think all these shows are the most important show. Bye for now.